Hey everyone, welcome to the movie tour. Today we'll be discussing a rather controversial topic in the world of cinema, and that would be Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. Now this is a film that's been widely celebrated for its portrayal of Jesus Christ's crucifixion and death. However, today we're going to explore it in a slightly different way. The idea that the movie might actually be a horror film. We're going to examine the key elements that make up a horror movie and see just how The Passion of the Christ fits the bill. And then you can decide for yourself what genre you truly believe this movie belongs in. So if you're ready to delve into this thought-provoking and somewhat creepy analysis, let's get started. Now I know what you're thinking. Vic, how can you even begin to think of The Passion of the Christ as a horror movie? To which I have to say, have you watched the movie? Like, have you really watched it? Like all of it? Without hiding your eyes behind your hands during the torture scenes? No? Yeah, it's scary. I watched this as a kid and it terrified me. Is this something you would show to your kids, even at a young age? For me, it gave me nightmares. And now that I'm older, I fully understand what's happening in the movie, it doesn't scare me as much as it brings me to tears. I almost feel like this movie it's impossible not to cry, even for a non-believer. The Passion of the Christ is a film that was written and directed by Mel Gibson, and it received a significant amount of criticism for its depiction of the brutal and graphic crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Some critics argue that the film was excessively violent and focused too much on the physical suffering of Jesus rather than the teachings and the message of love and compassion. And I'm kind of inclined to agree. However, on the other hand, some supporters of the film argued that the graphic portrayal of the crucifixion was necessary. It was necessary to convey the full extent of the suffering and the sacrifice that Jesus endured. Now, the Bible consists of 66 documents. The author of these documents came from a wide range of backgrounds, including kings, shepherds, farmers, tax collectors, fishermen, and even physicians. And these documents encompass a wide, diverse range of literary genres such as history, poetry, law codes, and letters. And they all differ in style and length. However, all of the books of the Bible can really be summed up into 8 different genres. The story of the Passion of the Christ falls under the biblical genre of gospel. The Gospels in the Bible are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These Gospels tell the record of Jesus' life written by 4 different authors for 4 different reasons. So this story, if it were to be transformed into a movie, would definitely be considered a gospel. But what if we had to put it in a genre of today's films? Now both Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb.com categorize this film as a drama. But to simplify it solely as a drama, I feel belittles its overall impact. But perhaps it's simpler and safer to just go with that conclusion. However, when I asked Google what its genre would be, it gave me a couple answers. Religious was one, and horror was another. To understand this, we have to understand the horror genre. Horror is a genre of film that was intended to elicit feelings of fear, terror, and dread. It typically features unsettling, frightening, or supernatural elements such as monsters, ghosts, and otherworldly entities. And it may incorporate themes of death, violence, and the macabre. This genre often employs jump scares, suspenseful music, and other techniques to create a sense of unease and suspense in the viewer. So how does The Passion of the Christ fall into this category? Well, the film starts with dark, ominous music overlaying a dark forest and a whispered prayer. As a young child in the theater, I was already terrified. This opening shot sets the tone immediately for the rest of the film. Judas is paid and Jesus prays in tears as he knows of his impending doom. And as he prays, Satan lurks in the shadows. Satan's played by Rosalinda Celentano, and her unnerving presence and haunting performance adds to the sense of tension and foreboding in the scene. The actress relied on a series of eerie, almost supernatural gestures, facial expressions, and body language to convey the character's malevolence and twisted nature. Celentano's appearance as Satan was also striking. Her androgynous features, bald head, and dark, almost reptilian-looking skin made her a visually arresting presence on screen. She was able to create a chilling and unforgettable portrayal of evil. She terrifies me, like wet the bed terrifying. Now, after Jesus gets arrested 15 minutes into the film, the violent beating begins, and it doesn't stop for the entirety of the movie. We see Judas racked with guilt over his betrayal of Jesus. Suddenly, a group of children appear, and they seem innocent at first, but then their faces twist and contort into a demonic fashion. The children then begin to attack Judas, biting and scratching him as he struggles to fight them off. The use of possessed children in this scene is a classic horror trope, and it's particularly effective in this context. And there's an image of Satan carrying a baby, and this is inherently terrifying. It evokes feelings of dread and revulsion in the viewer. This shot is in my nightmares and I can't get rid of it. In another scene with Judas, he comes across a dead animal covered in flies, and this is another classic horror trope found in many horror films because it evokes feelings of disgust and revulsion in the audience. The image of a rotting carcass swarming with insects is deeply unsettling, and it immediately creates a sense of dread and horror. The film's portrayal of violence is brutal, and it can be difficult to watch for some viewers. The torture scenes are not intended to be horror in the traditional sense, but they certainly contain elements of horror. Director Mel Gibson deliberately chose to depict the violence in an unflinching manner using a combination of practical effects and digital effects. This created a realistic and visceral experience for the audience. Now, one of the most graphic scenes in the film, and I'm not going to show it on the screen, is the scourging of Jesus, where he is mercilessly whipped by the cat of nine tails. The scene is unrelenting in its violence and blood and flesh flying off of Jesus' body as he's whipped repeatedly. This is usually the point when I start to cry. As he carries the cross, he is stoned and whipped. We see blurred images of the people around Jesus. This puts us in the shoes and makes us as the viewer take that same walk of death to the crucifixion. Another scene that's particularly hard to watch is the nailing of Jesus to the cross, which is depicted in an agonizing detail. The explicit depiction of blood and gore is intended to shock and disturb the audience, forcing them to confront the reality of Jesus' suffering. Mel Gibson wanted to create a film that was realistic and historically accurate, and the violence and brutality that Jesus endured were central to the story, and they needed to be depicted in a graphic and visceral way in order to convey the full extent of his suffering and sacrifice. The violence in this film was almost necessary to counteract what we see as a sanitized, watered-down version of the crucifixion that's become prevalent in popular culture. The director believed that many people had become desensitized to the true horror of the crucifixion, and his film was necessary to remind them of the terrible physical and emotional suffering that Jesus had to endure. Now, even though there are horrifying images throughout the film, the base of it all lies in love and mercy. Jesus is carrying the weight of the sins of humanity on his shoulders. He's taking on the punishment that humanity deserved for their sins in order to provide a way for them to be reconciled with God. So the next time you're reading The Passion of the Christ, because it's all subtitled, you gotta read that, consider the horror tropes within the film and tell me what you think. Just because it follows horror tropes, should it be considered a horror film? Or should we put it in more of a biblical genre, like a gospel? Or perhaps we just leave it at a drama and call it a day. Tell me what genre you would give Passion of the Christ. Put your thoughts down in the comments below. Tell me if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm right. I want to hear all your thoughts, and we'll see you guys next time on The Movie Tour.